1 Samuel chapter 4, 12 to 22. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent and with earth upon his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting upon his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man hastened and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, "I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." And he said, "How did it go, my son?" He who brought the tidings answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for he was an old man and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was with child, about to give birth. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women attending her said to her, "Fear not, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or give heed. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." The word of the Lord. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. We are going way back in time today, before Jesus, before the Second Temple, which Rome destroyed in AD 70, before the First Temple, before Solomon's Temple, before the first king, before King Saul. There's no government at all among the tribes of Israel, the people of God. The only thing they have in common is their worship of God. So keep that in mind. And please pray with me one more time. God, I'm about to preach about the Ark of the Covenant. It's a story about a box, a God box. Lord, help us to look in and to get something out of it. Amen. When I was a boy in Sunday school, when the teacher asked one of us to open with prayer, that was about all that some kids could come up with. Lord, help us to get something out of it. And I had grown up in the church, and I had heard the old men and their stately prayers with their these and their thous and their heavenly fathers, and so I thought I was pretty smart, and I thought, Lord, help us get something out of it. Boy, that is a lame prayer. Now I realize it was a great prayer. It's a humble prayer. So I repeat it here. Lord, help us get something out of this. Because in some ways, the best thing to do with this story is to just read it and hope you can get something out of it. It's a short clip from a pretty long and involved story from ancient Israel. There's poor old fat and blind Eli, and his poor dead sons, the corrupt priests, Hophni and Phinehas, of the corrupt house of Eli. The whole bunch of them are corrupt. There's Eli's unnamed dying daughter-in-law, and there's a brand new little baby, Ichabod. It looks like a new low for the yet again wayward Israelites. And it's a cast out of Hollywood, and the story is worthy of Stephen King or maybe even Edgar Allan Poe. In a nutshell, the Israelites and their dangerous, more advanced and better armed enemies, the Philistines, right? Goliath, there's a whole bunch of them. He wasn't the only one. The Israelites and the Philistines had fought it out on the plains about a dozen miles east of the Mediterranean Sea between two little villages called Ebenezer and Aphek. And they were about as far apart as it is from here to Spencer. Okay? And in that fight out in the battle, out on the plains, the Israelites lost 4,000 men. They got it back together and they got ready for a second battle. But first, they sent over to Shiloh. Remember, this is pre-temple, so the tabernacle a portable thing they carried with them, and the presence of God went along with them in that tabernacle. That's what Shiloh was about, pre-temple stuff. And that was about from here to Meeker, about 35 miles east. So before they went back to battle, they ran over to Shiloh and brought the Ark of the Covenant to the battlefield. Now the Ark was basically a big fancy box, right? It was covered with gold. It had a place on top for God's presence to sit on top of the cherubim, and God rode on top of the box. There were long poles on it so men could carry it. I imagine 2 or 4 or 6 before and in front on those long poles. Their plan was to trot the Ark of the Covenant out in front of the soldiers the next time they went to battle. And in my mind, they were kind of treating it like a piece of field artillery. We're going to run God out there ahead of them and in front of us. Well, when the Ark arrived in camp from Shiloh, with the priests tending to it, the Israelites hooped and hollered. They thought they were going to win for sure this time. And the Philistines heard their cheering, and they wondered what they could possibly have to cheer about, because the Philistines figured they were going to kick them again, right? But then the Philistines got wind that what the Israelites had done and what they were cheering about was that they had sent in for the ultimate in reinforcements. They'd sent for their God box. And they freaked out, because the Philistines knew what that meant. They remembered what had happened in Egypt when God turned loose on the Egyptians, right? Or to put it biblically, they said, "Woe to us. These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness." So they said to their men, "Take courage, be men. Don't become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." Well, Israel got whooped again, this time with 30,000 soldiers killed. And the story goes, on top of that, after killing the priests, the Philistines ran off with the ark. Which brings us back to the clip of today's scripture. A Benjaminite escaped the battlefield and hightailed it back to Shiloh, where he told Eli the bad news. His 2 sons were dead. Not only that, he had to report the unfathomable news that the Ark of the Covenant had been captured, which meant in effect that the Philistines had kidnapped God. Then there's an obituary when fat Eli, and he's fat in this story with his own glory. Okay, Eli is fat, full of himself, basically. Well, he keels over and he breaks his neck and he dies. And then there's another obituary when his daughter-in-law dies, giving birth. And then there's a birth announcement when her little baby Ichabod is born. And yes, it's like Ichabod Crane. Ichabod in Hebrew means something like the glory of God has departed. But some say a better translation is this: God has taken God's glory away. See the difference? One's passive in observation, and the other one, God has the agency. God has taken God's glory into exile. That's what Ichabod means. And that's an important distinction, because in this story, in this theological narrative, the ark is more than just a big fancy box with a place for God to sit and write on, as the priest carried. God was moving in God's famous, mysterious ways. Again, as often happens in the scripture, God's in control of this situation, whether it reads like it is or not. As Walter Brueggemann points out, he's a Hebrew Bible scholar who I quote quite often because he's also a great poet. He points out that God is self-propelled in this story. God is coming and going as God sees fit, no matter what the corrupt priests think that they're doing, or what their blind father thought. And he was blind in more ways than one, obviously. And Brueggemann also points out something even more profound, which really got my attention on this story when it first got my attention. As far as scholars can tell, the little baby's name, Ichabod, that's the first time ever in the Hebrew Bible that kabod is mentioned. Ichabod is mentioned, well, kabod means God's glory. Ichabod means God's glory is taken away. Well, the first time that God's glory is mentioned then in the Hebrew Bible, in the Old Testament, is in the situation that it's missing. That's interesting. It's pretty interesting to me. It was not the last time that God's people would say, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone." I mean, think about that. God's glory is only mentioned first in its absence. Now back to the story. It goes on past Eli's broken neck, past the birth of Ichabod and God, and the ark's capture by the Philistines. In the story, God goes a couple of rounds with the Philistines' national god Dagon. You know, the priests are setting them up against one another. And God won, quite literally, when the statue collapsed and crumbled in a heap. And it worried some of the Philistines, well, literally to death in the story. Some of them got tumors, or maybe hemorrhoids. No lie, some scholars and some translators say this is hemorrhoids. Because what happened was the Philistine villages, they played hot potato with the Ark of the Covenant. They captured it, and they got more than they bargained for. And every time it came into one of the communities, people got sick and started dying. So they said, y'all take it. So the Philistine communities passed the Ark among one another every time tumors broke out, which was every time. And they decided, finally, to ship it back to the Israelites. And with some kind of weird gift or atonement thing involved, because inside it they had placed gold pieces shaped to look like tumors, whatever they were, and mice, little gold mice and little gold tumors, when they shipped the ark back to the Israelites, calling Stephen King, right? That's just some weird stuff. Well, they hitched the ark to 2 milk cows. When they pinned up the calves, pinned them up so the mamas wouldn't want to leave, right? But they did anyway. The cows took off, pulling the ark. And God made God's way back home, as it were, the ark. And there was a big party, and some of the children and grandchildren of Jeconiah were struck dead because God was not impressed with their worship. It's all here. It's all in 1 Samuel chapters 4 through 6. It is a heck of a story. It's an incredible story. It's a crazy story. So what do we do with it? It's as much a part of the canon of Scripture. It's as much a part of the Bible as the Sermon on the Mount. Well, let's be readers of the Lost Ark. Oh, see how long it took for me to get to the punchline? Let's be readers of the Lost Ark. Because whatever else this is, the Scripture is a gift from our ancestors in faith, and it's a great story, so let's see what we can get out of it. It's hard, because this is primitive stuff. The stuff of an invisible God riding on a fancy magic box, going into battle. And then he got kidnapped. God going into exile and then getting kidnapped. Well, that's pretty hard. And then what about this, though? God was going away from his children. Well, even if they were wayward, isn't God love and light and forgiving and merciful and all these things? Why would God leave God's children? Why would God go with the ark? And what about that box? Why do we keep this story? What can we get out of it? Well, as part of our own story, it's an early chapter in our story. I think the Ark of the Covenant is one of the first steps toward Jesus. First came theology by geography and architecture. God is on this mountain, or God is in this box. God is in the tabernacle. And then came theology by culture and politics. God is on these high places, the country people said. No, God is in the temple in town, the priests in town said. Right? There's always been this tension about who God is and where God is. Then came theology by a woman at a well. In the Gospel of John, the Samaritan woman said, but God is on this mountain. Right? Remember? And what did Jesus say? Well, here's theology by Jesus. Jesus basically said, God is neither on your mountain nor on our mountain. He said, it's time for people to figure this out and to worship God in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such as these to worship him. Jesus says in the Gospel of John, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And then Paul said, in him we live and move and have our being. In him we live and move and have our being. In us, around us, about us, above us, beside us, under us. We're enveloped in it, in him. And that was the paradigm shift of theological paradigm shifts. Now back to the box and that lost ark. God in self-imposed exile? What about in God we live and move and have our being? What about God is still speaking? Well, it's not like God never comes to the end of a sentence or a paragraph or a story, or at least pauses for effect. You know, we so characterize God as word and breath and spirit, and those are all great ways to think of it. But the unspoken word, the held breath, the seemingly absent spirit can be as palpable as my daughter Ashley's absence in her old room in our empty nest after all this time. Her room is now filled with all kinds of non-Ashley things, but after 14 years, I walk into that room and I feel her presence. Now, we sometimes imagine God's absence, don't we? But does God go into exile in response to our own self-absorption sometimes? Or in response to us sometimes trotting God out like an artillery piece? In response to us using God as a weapon, does God say no? Even if we're using a weapon of God in self-defense, which we all do sometimes, and then we feel God's exile, God's absence, and it's depressing. Because we know that God is our only hope. Not another busted 401k, not another president, not another job, not another global summit, not another war, not another fence at the Mexican border. God is our only hope, whether we feel the presence of God or not. And so we hope for God. We hope for God. And that, as it turns out, is the ticket. Whether we believe this or that is one thing. And the specifics of what we believe change over time. It's faith. It's trust. That is the substance of things hoped for. The hope for invisible God on the Ark of the Covenant to come back. Our trust is the evidence of things not seen. Our trust is the evidence of invisible God in whom we ache to worship in spirit and truth. We want to get it right. I ache to get it right. Despite ourselves and our fears and the silence or our deafness, we do live and move and have our being in God. We hope to live and we live to hope, I think. Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk, poet, and activist, put it like this: and no man is an island. And if you haven't read that classic, get it or borrow it and read it. He said, we do not hope for what we have. Think about it. We don't hope for what we have. Let that sink in to this old story, into that blood-soaked soil of the battlefield out there between those two little bitty ancient communities of Ebenezer and Aphek. Let it soak into the soil under Eli's broken neck. What did he hope? We do not hope for what we have, Merton said. Therefore, to live in hope is to live in poverty, having nothing. This is not easy stuff. Yet if we abandon ourselves to the economy of divine providence, if we abandon ourselves to God's economy, we have everything we hope for. What? We don't wish for what we have. We don't hope for what we have, because if we have it, we wouldn't hope for it. But when we hope for it, if it's in God's economy, then we have it. He goes on, by faith we know God without seeing him. By hope we possess God without feeling his presence. If we hope in God, he has taken possession of us. Even your hope is a gift of God. Let that sink in, seasoning any longing you may have for whomever or whatever you've lost. He goes on, to belong to him is the same as to possess him, since he gives himself completely to those who give themselves to him. We are united to him in darkness because we have to hope. We have to hope. The ancient Israelites, even with the Ark of the Covenant in the hands of their enemies, the Philistines, they had to have hope because that's all they could have, since the Philistines had carried off God. What else did they have? Let it sink in. Let the idea of God's presence and God's apparent absence be salve for whatever scars you carry from your own battles. Any fight that you had that ended with someone taking away your God box. That ended with somebody taking away whatever it was that you had put God into, a person, a thing, a place, or a time of life. And thank God that by God you were left with hope, or you wouldn't be here. takes more than faith. It takes more than faith. Thomas Merton goes on, without hope, our faith gives us only an acquaintance with God. Without love and hope, faith only knows him as a stranger. Better than nothing. But listen again, without love and hope, faith only knows God as a stranger. And I wonder, is that why so many people of faith, who we know, seemingly without love and without hope, seem like such strangers to us? We all know people like that. They're full of faith, they talk of faith, they wear their faith on their sleeve, but they don't seem to have any hope and they don't seem to have any love. Is that why they seem like strangers to us? Without love and hope, the supposed faithful are strangers to those who do have love and hope. Merton goes on, hope casts us into the arms of his mercy. Hope casts us into the arms of his providence. If we have hope in him, we will not only come to know that he is merciful, but we will experience his mercy in our own lives. We will experience God's mercy in our own lives, and there is God's glory. After all, there's kabod, not Ichabod, because in God's apparent absence, there's God's clear glory. And why? Where, rather? It's because it's where we too seldom look. Merton says, hope seeks not only God in himself, but it seeks finally and beyond all else God's glory revealed in ourselves. That is, in myself and in yourself and in other selves and in every other self. That's where we see God's glory. That's where we see the imago Dei, right? The image of God. That's the glory of God, as Merton puts it. The final manifestation of his infinite mercy is in others. And that's what we pray for when we say, thy kingdom come. The glory of God in others. Or as Jesus put it, according to Matthew, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. I was naked. I was sick. I was in prison. Truly, I tell you, he said, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are my brothers and sisters, you did it to me. Now, there doesn't have to be anything spooky going on with the Ark of the Covenant for its loss to the Philistines to have devastated the Israelites, because that's where they had embodied the presence of God in their collective lives. And things like that matter. Things matter. A dozen or so football seasons ago, I lost an important thing that represented an important part of the covenant that I have between my wife and my daughter and myself. It was a simple thing. It was a silly thing, about as unsophisticated a thing as a fancy box with a place for God to ride on. It even had a place to sit. It was one of those folding seats, you know, the kind that you use on bleachers. It was in Oklahoma State, orange and black, and had Pistol Pete on it. Well, walking into a game at the new stadium, right, the new Boone Pickens Stadium, to watch God's chosen Cowboys do battle with the Philistine Tigers of Missouri, Dolly and Ashley got in ahead of me, and the guy scanning the tickets wouldn't let me come in with that seat. To get in right then, I just had to let her go, because at that instant, the car was a mile away, the crowd was chaos. You've been to games. People were crowding behind me, new stadium, and the game was about to start, and Dolly and Ashley were already in there. I didn't know what else to do, so I tossed that thing into a pile of others forbidden things, and I let it go. And a minute later, I was in the stadium, furious. And in another minute, we were in our seats, and I was sick to my stomach. I was in a slow, sick burn, and I felt robbed and put upon and misled and deceived, you know. But I made the decision. I could have gone back to the car a mile away, but I didn't. I felt trapped. I didn't think I had much choice. I was caught in a bind. Well, after a while, I left the seat to go to the gate after the crowd had subsided some, and I looked for my seat, and it was nowhere to be found, of course. They'd hauled everybody's stuff wherever they hauled it. Well, we had come in two cars, and so I just left. I went back home, fuming. And the next day I woke up grieving. It sounds silly, but embodied in that thing, in that portable seat, with a folding back and washy orange and black, were so many memories and times and experiences with my Ashley. I'm such a sad one. she's my stepdaughter and my only child. And I love her dearly, and I miss her so much. She just was in my life at age 9, then she was gone at 18, moved away and grown up, as they do. But it happened so fast that it still leaves my heart spinning. Now, this is pre-grandbaby, so the grandbaby helps. But most of those times were with her mom, too. Times sitting on that silly seat were when we were our own little family. The only one I will ever have. So, that's how important that silly seat was to me. That's why I was grieving and sick and mad. I have so few things like that I could have looked at and held and remembered. I can be a sentimental sap, but there is you a hint, maybe, of what it was like for the Israelites to have their God box be stolen. How long did they feel? And I know that you've lost similar things in life. Much more important things than a seat back chair, But we've all lost things that made us think God had left us. They are, of course, just things. The treasure we store up on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, where Philistines capture fancy boxes and carry God away, when ticket scanners of football games are just doing their job. That kind of not God treasure has to do with more than money and wealth. I think we get hung up on that sometimes. It has to do with more than money. It has to do with things that become more than things to us, even everyday things. The truth is, the only time my relationship with my little family suffered over my loss of that folding ark of memories was when, that night and that day, when I was angry and bitter and resentful over losing it, and I withdrew into myself. And that raises a big question to me about the story of God, of the Israelites, and the Ark of the Covenant. Did God take away his glory just to defeat the Philistines and to take down their God Dagon and give the enemy Philistines a taste of his power just to show off? Probably not. Or did the Israelites, in fear and in grief over the careless loss of their God box, close in on themselves, separating from God and from one another, and straining their covenant with him and with one another? And in that case, what was God to do but keep on being God? God kept on being God, even separated from the Israelites, and that made the Philistines sick. In any case, we know that the Israelites eventually got back the ark and they got God back. In our case, when we carelessly let God get away and we find ourselves in fear and in grief, we know how to get God back. And we know that it's really a matter of bringing ourselves back. God never leaves us. We call ourselves into conscious awareness of God's presence. That's why I don't like to pray for God to come to us. God's here, always, always. Well, and we have faith. Faith, which acquaints us with God. Faith acquaints us and reacquaints us with God. But we also have hope, by which we are possessed by God. And we have love, which binds our covenant with God and brings us face to face with kabod. It brings us face to face with the glory of God. When we go face to face with love to others. This we know, not things, rather faith, hope, and love abide. Right? These three. But the greatest of these is love. Amen.